Hello, my name is Candace Epps Robertson, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of English and Comparative Literature and faculty affiliate in American Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I research and teach in the areas of cultural rhetorics and literacy studies. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of this series. My research is driven by a desire to understand how people teach, learn, and think about what it means to be a citizen in both local and global contexts. One of my current research projects investigates BTS, their fandom army, and the ways in which people in this community participate in both public facing, social justice oriented projects while also educating within the fandom about these issues. I'd like to engage with two questions I'm working to answer in my research. First, why is it important to examine fan activism, not just at the level of public facing work, but also the educating that happens within the community? And second, what kinds of communicative practices are being used to educate? Certainly, most would agree that fan organizing is not new. Coming together within a fandom to raise awareness or speak to social issues is also not unique to A.R.M.Y. However, I think what makes some curious when it comes to A.R.M.Y. is the scale, effort, and diversity, both in terms of who makes up the fandom and the kinds of causes represented. With fans from around the world who represent almost every demographic one can think of, people enter this community with their own social commitments and interests. It's important to note that BTS doesn't dictate how fans should respond to social issues. The messages often found in their lyrics and public addresses often read like invitations for fans to consider a range of topics. These responses could be on the level of the individual, such as someone who blogs or tweets about the ways lyrics help them to think critically about issues or take action against something like bullying or stigmas around mental health. Or you could see a larger response, such as the philanthropic efforts from One in an Army, a fan driven organization that helps to organize fundraising projects from a variety of human rights and social issues. Part of my research argues for us to see that these fan responses to social issues should not be seen in overly simplified or generalized ways. It's important to recognize the collective work done by the fandom to raise money and awareness, and equally important to recognize the labor that often goes into educating people about these issues, because this also reveals the perils and challenges for many who do this work. So, how do people in a fandom that spans the globe do the work? What does this kind of education look like? To answer these questions, I'm analyzing moments in A.R.M.Y. fandom history. One of these moments is an examination of how some A.R.M.Y. responded to the Black Lives Matter movement during 2020. In the wake of the killing of George Floyd and protests for attention to the issues of violence and racism against Black people, there were concerted efforts within the fandom to raise money and awareness for Black Lives Matter. These efforts, many of which started before BTS made their own announcement about Black Lives Matter, were driven by fans and received a great deal of media attention. It became apparent rather quickly that some seemed surprised or even confused that fans would even do something like this. I believe that what was missed was an understanding that fans enter these spaces with any number of commitments, interests, and beliefs, in addition to wanting to connect with others around music and artists. For some, fandoms can be sites of critical exchange and learning about a range of issues if they listen. So, I'm examining the ways in which fans circulated information on how to support the Black Lives Matter movement and attempts made to educate those within the fandom about race and racism. In my research, I identified, tracked, and analyzed three ways this kind of education was happening through stories of personal experience, hashtags, and visual art. In this brief talk, I'll share two examples. Stories can function rhetorically to help us share experiences, knowledge, histories, and build connections. Stories, as scholar Lisa King writes in Survivance, Sovereignty, and Story, quote, change our reality. There were attempts by some Black A.R.M.Y. to share their stories across A.R.M.Y. Twitter. These stories came in many forms: Twitter threads, letters, blog posts, and sometimes in group chats away from the gaze of the public. While some stories documented histories of race in both American and global contexts, others sought to offer support and care for one another. These stories shared history and often encouraged reflection on the part of readers. One example I look at is a piece titled BTS, Black Lives Matter, and Anti-Black Racism. It was published to Medium on June 2, 2020, and shared on Twitter. The author, identified as A.R.M.Y., a Black fan, carefully explains that they are speaking only for themselves and not trying to be the voice of all Black Army. The letter begins by describing the many messages and instances of anti Blackness and violence faced by the Black community. This litany of how racism functions in both overt and innocuous ways provides a deft articulation of why this particular moment and movement was and still is important for many. At a time when many in the Army fandom were expressing views on whether or not BTS should speak out, A.R.M.Y offers a poignant address that explains their perspective on why this moment is so important. In one section, they write that they specifically are addressing white and non-black Army and share the following. Quote, "You have the luxury of never having to wonder if you are standing someone who might secretly think that your humanity is in question or something to mock or deride." End quote. While the author notes that even if BTS didn't speak out, they still felt their support. And it's important here to note that this was circulated 2 days before BTS would in fact tweet in support of Black Lives Matter. The author acknowledged that the author acknowledges why some Army desire to have BTS speak out, and they encourage the community to listen to these voices. This statement, along with the aforementioned examples, demonstrates an attempt to share perspective and encourage reflection, as the author punctuates the piece with questions directed towards the reader, likely a move to encourage engagement with the issues. A second example I'd like to share came through the use of combined hashtags. As James McVeigh and Heather Woods argue in Anti-Racist Activism and the Transformational Principles of Hashtag Publics, quote, hashtags allow activists and organizations to mobilize a rapid rhetorical response to pressing contingent issues, to pressing contingent events, end quote. Hashtags can then create a public and digital space that often lacks a clear audience. It is important to note that the Black Lives Matter hashtag was circulating within the Army community before BTS tweeted their message of support on June 4th, 2020. On June 1st, 2020, another hashtag appeared in the Army community. It read, "We love Black Army." It was started by Dr. Jeong Lee, a Korean Army academic who used the hashtag in conjunction with the Black Lives Matter hashtag as a means to show support. Dr. Lee's tweet directed towards K-Army, translated in English, reads, quote, "I'd like to ask you K-Armies, the current situation in the U.S. is so serious that I'm especially worried about the hurt of Black Army. Wouldn't it be a little bit of strength to show them that you're with them? Why don't you write a message of encouragement with the hashtags? I'm worried about people who might be hurt beyond our expectations, especially our overseas fans. We know so well about the protest site filled with fear and anger. I hope our support and backing can help them to turn their despair into hope." End quote. Under the hashtag, a range of conversations ensued, from people asking to learn more about what was happening to links to blogs where K-Army articulated their own attempts at trying to understand race and racism in this context. The hashtag functioned then as a way to both call attention to the issue, offer support, and as a space to exchange resources and educate one another about the issues at hand. I think it's important that both of these examples demonstrate attempts from within the Army fandom for fans to educate one another. It's also important to recognize that their attempts were not met without critique or resistance. For example, there were some who felt the hashtag was not enough, and others who sought to silence even the mention of BTS and Black Lives Matter in a sentence together. So what can we do? Where does this leave us? This research is ongoing for me, but right now I think we need more analysis and attention to how these exchanges happen and to what impact they have in the long term. We need to amplify the attempts at education, and most importantly, we need to listen. We need to listen to the fans who have been doing this work and who are committed to building and caring for their fandom community. We must recognize the complexity within. Thank you.